So I'm Judith Katz. I have been a member since 1976 with NTL. I was in the second wave when NTL restructured itself with Elsie and Edie, Elsie Cross and Edie Seashore. And I am now currently an emeritus member. Over the years, I have been on the board. I have served on the capabilities committee with Fred had led a repositioning of NTL. Let's see, and I've been involved in many things over the years. Before I joined NTL, I actually did a workshop with Bailey Jackson for the board when Barbara Bunker and Steve Jenks were there and Gwen Wade. So that was on racism, and that's kind of also been part of my entry. And Fred Miller and I have been business partners with the Khalil Jameson Consulting Group for 35 years. I'm a white woman, I'm heterosexual. I think that's my bona fides.
There we go. Thank you very much, Judith. Fred?
Fred, also with the Khalil Jameson Consulting Group, African-American man, and went to NTL for the first time in 1972 as a participant in a T group, which was a life-changing experience and opened up a new world to me. I became a member in 1977. I was sponsored by Edie Seashore and Elsie Cross. And then I joined the board in 1981 and stayed on the board to 1985. And served with Gwen Wade and David L. Brown and just a wonderful, Ryan Lippett, just a wonderful group of people. And then when Lennox Joseph was the president of NTL, he asked me to do a repositioning of NTL for the future. And I led that in the 90s, along with Edie and Elsie and others being a part of the core group. And that's where we come up with the concept of having core teams inside of organization looking at structure, processes. And Judith, what was the thing that you worked on?
Capabilities, organizational capabilities, NTL staff members' capabilities. So how do we make sure that there's a level of quality, and how do we give feedback around those things as well?
So that was a big thing that came out of that repositioning, was our staff members' capabilities and making sure that we were positioned for the future, as well as other things. It was a transformational change for the organization, and it really just started shifting us to not looking at the past, but looking at the future.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. You just went back to the 1970s. And so we have a rich amount of history to examine. And I want to start by asking about your best experiences. If you could recall a story, a time, a situation, something that you experienced that you were when you were most excited about your work or membership in NTL. What was that best experience for you?
So the repositioning experience was my best experience. And when members were leaning in, they knew that we had to change. The struggle was how much to change. Yes. And so some of the things that I wanted to change, I wanted to reduce the fees to an honorarium, and I wanted to get rid of the cohort system. Did not happen then. But I think we planted seeds around it saying, we're not sure we need this. How long do we need this? And I think my compromise was, okay, we don't need to get rid of it in the 90s, but let's keep alert to it so that we can change it when we want to. The other thing is that people were just energized. People love this organization, and I love this organization. And so being involved with it in any form or fashion, whether I served on the board or ran a committee, was always just a labor of love. And the repositioning work just brought out the love of members. We had little or no controversy, and people were being creative and thinking about, how can we do some things differently? How can we be different? How can the president be different? How do we have lines of authority in the organization that works for all? So that was a great, wonderful, we even had t-shirts. That was a great and wonderful experience. We had 2 meetings of members on that project.
And so let me just ask you a question about that. What was most significant about that repositioning work for you? What made it so memorable for you?
The reason that I fell in love with NTL was because when I went to Bethel the first time, I started seeing some of the members walking down the street. I didn't know who they were, but when I went the second, third, and fourth time, I started meeting Edie and Elsie and other people. And the spirit that they brought to the organization, the spirit they brought to life, just walking down the street, I felt like the air around them was different than the air around other people. And so what made it memorable for me is that there are lots of people like that have been historically and currently in NTL that have a commitment and a presence for life and human life.
Yes.
And that human beings can be better tomorrow than they are today. And NTL has some technology, a lot of technology, to help that be true. And so for me, it was, these are people, and this is an organization that wants to help humanity be better.
Mm-hmm.
And being in corporate sector, growing up in the inner city of Philadelphia as an African-American man, lower middle class family, I wasn't sure anybody wanted the world to be better, at least for people like me. And when I went to NTL, I experienced people who wanted the world to be different for me and other people of color and for everybody. And that blew my mind and it made me fall in love.
Wow. Wow. That's wonderful to hear. Thank you for that, Fred. Judith, let's turn to you.
Oh my God, there's so many. First of all, sitting and watching, seeing Richard, you with the Founders House behind you, just brings back a flood of memories. So my first experience with NTL members went to 1969 when I was an undergraduate at Queens College, and I was in my first T group. And we started dealing with issues in the T group around Black-white issues. So my experience, even before I became a member, like many of us, right, I was connected with NTL. And at Queens College, there were 3 people who I was also doing work on racism with at the college: Carl Jennings, Richie Orange, Pam Palenque North, all of whom became NTL members. And so there was a cohort of us who were on this journey, and we had a faculty member who was an NTL, had been at NTL, and he brought NTL to Queens College.
Oh.
So then in 1972, I decided I wanted to get to Bethel. I wanted to experience this. So from 72 to 76, I spent my summers in Bethel being head of the children's program and the teens program. And so every summer I would meet everybody. You know, I'd be there for 8 weeks and I would see the labels go on the mailboxes and the labels come off the mailboxes. I'd watch people come up to Bethel being, you know, uptight, and then by the end the bras came off and everybody was transformed. You know, the whole world changed and it started all over again.
Yes.
So for me, being and meeting, you know, Sherm Kingsbury and obviously Elsie and Charlie, Edie and Charlie and Elsie and all of these people was just amazing. And John Carter and Rad Wilson. I mean, I could go on and on and on with the names.
Yeah.
The other person I met in Bethel was Fred Miller. And so, you know, that started, we found, and Khalil Jameson, who started our firm that Fred had met. So there was something about this combination of people who entered my life and I entered their life in such profound ways. And the list could go on and on, you know, Pat Beidel, I mean, just many, many, many people. And then my experiences in labs themselves, I remember Dari Funches and I did Holding On, Letting Go together. And it was the most profound experience for each of us individually and collectively in terms of our partnership and friendship. So there's something about place, there's something about people. Many people from NTL are still my lifelong friends. Yeah. And so I consider that, you know, and I know that if there's anything I needed, that people would be there and have my back. Mm-hmm. So there's something about, you know, I was this little Jewish kid from Queens who didn't think I knew much of anything, and really having my experiences and my voice affirmed through labs, through experiential learning, that what you're feeling is data, right? Was so powerful and important. And it really, I think it helped me with my work on white awareness, knowing that my voice mattered and I could make a difference. Yeah. And that I could be a force in the world for change and join with other people who would be a force in the world for change. And for me, that's really, I think, the power of NTL when it's at its best.
You know, so from 72 to 76, summers in Bethel, 8 weeks, children's program. What's the one story? I mean, I'm wondering, here's what I'm wondering, because you're young. Then there are all these other people who are elder than you, and you're running the children's program. So I'm just thinking of where you fall, but then your voice matters. So is there something there's that one thing that just stands out? I had this one experience, this one conversation, it just lifted the scales from my eyes. I guess I'm wondering.
Well, there's a funny story. So let me just back up 1 minute. So I was doing my doctoral work at UMass at the time. So I was in a doctoral program. I was 22 when I started doing the children's program. but I was trying to get a lift down to the main campus. And I remember John Carter stopped and asked me if he could take me down. Now, this may not answer your question, they may take it out of the video, but so John Carter says to me, you know, he introduces himself, I introduce myself, and he says, "Oh, are you here with your parents?" And I said, "No, I'm here by myself. I'm running the children's program." He says, "Oh, what school do you go to? You know, what college do you go to?" I said, "I'm working on my doctorate." And he said, "Oh," and that kind of cemented a relationship, because the assumptions he had made about I was this high school kid who was there doing, you know, like working for the summers. And then, but I felt like people took me seriously. I felt like people engaged with me not as, "Oh, you're just working with the kids program," but they took me seriously in terms of who I was. And then, you know, Charlie will always tell this story about when Becky and Kimmy were in camp, and we had them draw body outlines, and then and Kimmy came home and said to her father, "I wish you would be like they are in camp. They actually listen to me." And Charlie would tell that story everywhere about how, you know, what Becky was getting, what Kimmy was getting in camp. But for me, I think it was, you know, I was seeing myself as in this profession, and I felt like people treated me with respect and didn't treat me as just a kid.
Yeah.
And I think, and Elsie was an incredible supporter. When we'd have dean's meetings, I'd be sitting in the dean's meetings with the rest of the staff. So I was a part, because I was on the staff on campus. And so, you know, I was integrated, and I wasn't just put on the sidelines. I think that made a difference.
Fascinating. Fred, I don't know if that brings up anything for you, and if it doesn't, it's okay. But if it does, I want to give you some space.
All I would say is that the community at Bethel was extremely special, very supportive, very loving. And I felt like it accepted me where I was, knowing that I still had growth and development to do. And it was just, you know, you think we talk about a learning community, it was a learning community in the true sense of the word. And there were always something going on which you could learn from, whether you were sitting in a classroom or you were sitting at the bar. There was always learning and exchanging, and just a feeling of this is a place where life is changing. And it was just very, very rich.
Just as a quick thing, there were every one summer, every week before the lab started, all the staff went through a in-service training with Janice Eddy, Rosabeth Moss Cancer, Carol Pierce, and I can't remember, Judith Palmer on sexism. So we would do like a 4-hour workshop just before the lab staff would have a chance to do their design work. So, and I was integrated into that as well. But I think to Fred's point, it was a learning community, and there's so many advantages, whether it was around racism or sexism or willing to take on the hard conversations, but in a loving community way, that I think it really didn't feel like it was about blame. It was about how do we learn about this and how do we get smarter.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I want to turn my attention to values, as you spoke so much about these very important life-altering experiences. Can you tell me about some of the things, or tell us about some of the things you value deeply in terms of your work, but also in terms of the NTL community, the NTL family, if you want, and then yourself. So your work, NTL, and then yourself. And maybe those are all wrapped up somehow together, but can you tell me about what you value deeply? And if you have stories around those, I'd love to hear them as well.
One of the things kind of coming out of that 40s, 50s, 60s era was the whole Industrial Revolution and the way people were looked at there as hands and feet. Right. And what NTL was an awakening, that all of a sudden people are not just hands and feet, they have a whole being that they're bringing to it. And so to me, one of the things that I inhaled was people count. People are important, and no matter who you are or what you do, you're important in an organization and in life. And so each person is important and they have value, was something to me that I took out of NTL, I took out of the T group, right? When I was in the T group, I didn't necessarily like everybody in the T group, but I respected everybody by the end of that week or 2 weeks of T group experience. And I saw value in each person. And instead of looking for what they didn't have and what they were missing, I started looking at people as what do they have and what do they give their gifts? And then how can I gain from their gifts and how can I give them some of my gifts? And that reframed the whole human experience for me. And that to this day is what we do in our practice in Khalil Jameson, is really looking at each person as having value added and gifts to give to the organization. And our work is to unleash those people so that the organization can be great. So creating human systems where humans can be human is really what I feel like I've been about. And I got my first sense that that could be possible going to Bethel and being involved in a T group and then subsequent labs and then being on the board and interacting with people. And that people, I remember when I first met Charlie Seashore and he came into one of the sessions that I was a participant in, and he brought in laughter. And I was thinking prior to that, Black kid, Philadelphia, inner city, we don't laugh. And all of a sudden, Charlie comes in and he starts introducing laughter as part of the group process.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's a part of me I had locked out that now I can bring to my work and bring to my life. And now I'm one of the loudest laughters around.
I love it. I love it. Oh goodness, I'm trying to stay in interviewer mode here and not get into this story, you know. But I love it. There was a quote, and I'm going to try and ask you to bring it up again. Creating experiences where humans can be humans, or people can be people.
Right. Creating systems where humans can be humans. And prior to that, we created systems where people were just hands and feet.
Right.
And shut up and do your job. And just move the widget, but don't give us anything. And all of a sudden we realized, not all of a sudden, but we eventually realized that people have more to give than that. And organizations needed more than that from people.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you for that, Fred. Judith, let me knock the ball over to you.
Oh my God, I love it. Everything you've said, Fred. I mean, I think I hold two things very powerfully from my experience with NTL. One is the whole thing about valuing people's experiences, and that when we're in a client system, knowing that they have the truth in them, and it's unlocking that truth, right? That our job is to unleash their learning, unleash what they see as wrong or what they see as could be for better, and really unleashing and valuing the human experience. And I think there's so much more that we have capable of. And I think the one thing that a T group did was, how do you really have authentic relationships and have an authentic view and bring that authentic you to the world? And I think that the T group in its best and when we kind of get through that week together, really allows people to be their best selves. And I think when we do our work around creating diverse, high-performing, inclusive cultures, it's when you get that group of people together and they trust each other and they share their stories and they share their truths, you can create that high-performing system in the room, right? And it's possible. And it's possible. It's not something out there. It's possible. We've lived it and we've experienced it. So I think that's one thing, that in the here and now and in the moment, we can create those really powerful, authentic relationships around social justice and having people not feel oppressed and feel like they can really be their full selves and do their best work and have agency. So to me, that's one element of my experience with NTL that I think is very powerful. I think the other thing, coming into NTL in the early 70s, and the 70s was so important because it was a time of structural change.
Yes.
And I think the fact that NTL went from a predominantly membership white male organization to one that was led by an African-American woman on the board, Elsie, and Edie as president. First of all, the co-leadership model was huge, and then restructuring the whole organization to ensure that it was more diverse intentionally was powerful in terms of structural change. And I think that's one of the things that I think I always go back to NTL for, at that moment of being able to foster structural change. And the cohort model at that time was a very important way to create that and expedite it and not just leave it to chance. So I think both. It's the systems change and it's the individual group level pairing change that's also possible. And you need both. that you really need both to really make change. And I think it's impacted our work in the firm. And what we do with clients is that, just having the touchy-feely nice experience and walking out of here and having a good is not enough. You need the structural change as well. But to me, that's been, fundamental and foundational in terms of the values of NTL and also the learnings from it, and also putting it into practice.
And so if we use that, and I'm going to stick with you for a little bit, Judith, and then I'll come back to you, Fred. So Fred, you get a little bit of time to think about this. If you reflect on that as a value set, if you want, how has NTL, in your opinion, lived its mission and vision or vision in that light? If that makes sense to you, if I am making sense from that question.
Yeah, I get it. I think first of all, I don't think anybody ever achieves their vision. I wrote an article years ago about walking toward our talk. And so the vision's always going to be further away from our behavior. And the issue is, and our visions are going to keep changing, because as we experience something, we know that more is possible.
Right. So
I think NTL has tried to walk towards its talk. There are times I think it walks against its talk, but we're not going to get into that. I think holding on to social justice is an important piece of who we've been. I also think holding on to learning, growth, experiential education are also critical elements of our mission and our vision, and being in the world. That's the other thing. It's not just for our members. I think the other thing where we've been at our best has been when we've been able to, have a lab with hundreds of people showing up, because we're getting out in the world and we're influencing organizations in a way that those people then can go back into their organizations and make change.
Right.
So I think when we've been at our best, when we've been living our mission fully, it's when we've been able to really have people come to our labs and be able to engage in that way. To me, that would be the place that I'd say we're really doing. But I think it's not setting the bar so high that we're passing or failing. Are we really walking toward that talk?
Fred, over to you.
I think NTL's largest contribution is creating disciples. I think it had an idea about how life could be, how people could be in their interactions. But many of us, when we came to NTL, became alive, became aware, were awakened by this view of humankind and humankind's interaction that we necessarily didn't have before. We had pieces of it here and pieces of it there. And NTL kind of pulled that together for us. And so if I think about NTL's greatest contribution, it's people like me and Judith and many, many hundreds and thousands of other people having a light turned on inside them that had them have a different view of the world. Judith and I wrote a book called Be Big in 2008. We learned about being big based on living and being and breathing around NTL. I developed an advanced lab for NTL called Developing the Organization and Personal Self in '85, and been doing it since. And that came out of NTL and learning and saying, how do we bring this, as Judith said, and our clients? We're bringing that spirit, that light, that inner glow of how life can be and how we can be as human beings to every one of our interactions. And so I think NTL's largest contribution is helping people see the world differently, and then going forth in the world and helping other people see it differently. I can't think of anything greater that a person or organization can do. And so it makes me proud to be a part of NTL, and makes me so happy that in my incredible journey in life, I bumped into NTL as part of that journey.
And the discipleship that you speak of, there's testimony of the discipleship even in this interview. That we are here, and when you guys were at NTL, I was just becoming self-aware in the early 70s. But let me stay in my role here. All right.
And the other thing I would add is Judith mentioned, several names before. I'll just mention, is meeting Edie Seashore, Edie Elsie Cross, Barbara Bunker, John Ware, Will Schutz, Jimmy Jones, the Covendale brothers, Joe Potts, Gwen Wade, and David Brown, Judith Katz, Diane Porter, Daryl Funches, Kathy Royal. All those are great people. Before that, I didn't even know how to measure people. And when I went to NTL, I said, wow, This is what greatness looks like. This is what a wonderful human being looks like. We all got flaws. We all have things we can do and grow and be better. And just like they are, they're wonderful. And that awakening in me helped me see in others spirit and potential like I'd never seen before.
Mhm.
I mean, just building on that, Fred, I think about Sushma. I think about, the people we've met all over the world. I mean, there was some NTL people who came to an NTL lab that were in Australia that we've had relationships with since then. I mean, people, we could, Brenda Jones. I mean, we could go name of our members or people that we've connected with, all of whom have left an imprint on my life for sure, and have left an imprint on the world. And I think to me that just, they may not be members, that's okay, because a lot of people have taken what they've learned from that experience and have shared that in their own circles, which is so powerful.
I don't think there's another organization that can say that much about its impact in the world. So what the organization has done internal has been good and wonderful, but what it's done for the people that it's touched and crossed its path, you can't even measure. It changed the world. I mean, there's no question about it. NTL changed the world.
Powerful stuff. And I think that's a perfect inflection point to look forward. Because a lot of what we've talked about, even the image behind me, is reflection. But if we could talk a little bit about facing the future, and if you could put into words your one or two wishes, hopes, in terms of what you wish to see NTL contributing to the world, and what the preferred future, which was my first lab at NTL, preferred future, the preferred future, successful future for NTL would be, what would that be? Your top one or two? And why don't you go first, Judith, and then I'll come to Fred.
Sure. I'm going to try to say this as succinctly and appreciatively as I can.
Yes.
I was very fortunate. Fred and I, we were in our 20s when we started with NTL. Young people today see a future and see possibilities in ways that I can't see around that corner in where I sit from today. I would love NTL to unleash young people in the organization, outside of the organization, to co-create that future and to deal with the tackles of the issues, whether it's climate, whether it's injustice around the world as it's done in the past. I think for that, we need a leap. We need a structural change. We need to kind of take that blank sheet of paper again, just like Edie and Elsie did, to really think about the organization of the future. And to me, NTL, I think, could make a difference and touch all these people again in a profound way. We just have to do it differently. And we have to think about it in a way, but the core values, the core of how we do that, I think we need to hold. And I think it's having young people who really don't see obstacles, who don't say we tried it and it didn't work, to be able to say how we can make that happen. That would be my hope.
So let me make sure I grab that. Young people, the core remains, but without necessarily all of the we can't do, or we've tried this, just fresh eyes. Fresh eyes,
fresh voices, new experiences. They're doing, I did last year, there was maybe it was a year or 2 years, I can't remember. One of the conferences I facilitated a panel of some of the younger members. And one of the things was, NTL when it started was unique. There were no other organizations like that. There are many now for various reasons. So what is it that we can bring that is so unique that these young people can get behind and really want to foster? And I think, how can we make that mark in the world at this point with this set of history and these set of issues that are as troublesome as racism was, and anti-Semitism was when Lewin started NTL and Lippitt and the initial and Lee. So I think we need to rethink, reshape, relook at it, reinvent once again.
Yeah. Fred?
Renaissance often comes out of darkness. I believe that we're going through one of them hard, difficult times as a country, as a hemisphere, as a globe. And I'm thinking, hoping, praying every night that on the other side of this darkness, there will be another Renaissance. And I think as we talk about that renaissance, I think there's a major role for NTL to play. And NTL's got part of the key. People have to become more self-aware. You know, people have been closing down and being narrow and narrow and narrow in their thinking and being. How do we expand that out? People have been in their tribes and in their caves and with their groups and with their clubs. How do we expand that out again? I feel like we had to contract to kind of see all the ugly, and for the people who really wanted change to get pissed off enough to really push harder than they ever did before in their lives. And I believe in humankind. I believe in that humans will eventually move towards the light. Doesn't no guarantee it's going to happen in my lifetime or yours or anybody's. The timeline's not determined. But I think the process is. And if you look at human existence on this planet, there's been an evolution of that and a revolution of that at times. And I think we're in one of those times. And this may last a year or 2 years or 10 years or 20 years. But I fundamentally believe in every cell in my body that human beings have the potential to have an incredible breakthrough. And when that breakthrough happens, part of the success is going to be it's the learnings and new ways of looking at the world that NTL offers to the world and has been part of bringing to the world. And I think so. I'm still a big fan of T groups, a big fan of personal growth and personal development, because people need that. We have narrowed in. How do we expand out? NTL's got one of the best tools in the world to expand out.
I want to pose that question again in a slightly different way. And I feel inside of me that I want to hear a little bit more about, and from both of you, about your hopes, wishes for NTL. And so let me pose it slightly differently, maybe in a very simplistic manner. Imagine with me for a moment that you found a magic wand. And that magic wand allowed you to bring something forward that is a wish for NTL. It's not going to be necessarily a perfect process, but you can go poof, and this is going to happen for NTL, which I would say allows NTL to even more so live its mission and go closer to its vision. And I'm drawing from Judith on that, never really getting there, but getting closer to it. What's that thing that the magic wand is going to do? It's that thing that you can just poof and it happens. Posing the same question in a different way. I'm very mindful I'm doing that, but I'd like to hear more.
I think there are a lot of younger people in the world that have big ideas and big thoughts, or just big people. They're being big already. NTL's got to have more young people. I'm echoing Judith, more younger people in the organization, with the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, the 40-somethings. You know, people like us in our 70s, we can be mentors and can be coaches, and we can be somebody people come see periodically. But we have to have that next generation of youth moving this thing forward. I have a grandson, who's 5 years old. Oh my God, he's already brilliant. He uses a computer. I mean, he had a question about, how do you solve the Rubik's Cube? Oh, he just went online and looked it up. I mean, incredible. I mean, nobody said do that. He just knows that's where answers are.
Yeah.
What I would have never thought of that. I had never thought of it. And I'm thinking, wow, what else am I not thinking? And we're not thinking that a 5-year-old thinks, smarter than somebody in kindergarten. We got 5-year-olds, 6 years old, 7 years old that are brilliant already. And so bringing in, having that exposure to the future is often having exposure to the youth. And so how do we have that happen so that NTL can have that puff of change and growth? We've made a lot of mistakes as the old people, so they can make a lot of mistakes as the young people. It's all good. Yeah. And the question is, where are we trying to go? And if where we're trying to go has been the history of NTL is to make humankind better, then I think we're all on the same page. And then we just experiment and learn from that. So that would be my flash would be to interject into the organization a new and younger group of people so that they can explode inside of NTL. Not kicking anybody out, but surely letting us, the center of the organization, the center of our universe, have more youth and have more experimentation.
I'm so glad I asked the question the way I did, because it does, the way you said that really crystallized it for me. Bring more young people in and let them make their own errors and change things and do things differently and have that explosion. Yes, thank you very much for that, Fred. Judith, same question, magic wand, what's that thing?
I'm a little more destructive than my magic wand. Blow it up. You know, I mean, I think we've gotten entrenched in our systems. So I think we need, so to me, I'm so on the page with Fred about we need a cohort of young people's voices, not just bring them in, but they've got to have agency. So, you know, the board should be, you know, the board, get rid of the cohort system as we know it. The cohort should be mostly young people. And that voice is what drives it. I look at my granddaughter, she's 22 years old. The way she sees the world, what she sees, the other day, she's a poet and she's won a number of awards. And it's like she said, I always apply because if I don't apply, I'll never get it. Risk taking, her willingness to risk is so much higher than mine is at this point in my life. And I think as our membership has aged, which God bless them, there's a great cohort. I love everybody in the membership. I love our members, but we should not be driving the boat and we should not be steering it. We should be helping, as Fred said, coaching, mentoring, all of those great things, but we should be looking for that talent who is going to say, what about this? And what about that? And how do we use TikTok? And how do we use whatever? I don't even know what it is, as Fred said, to be thinking about how we make a difference in the world right now. And that to me is, we need to think about our presence differently. We need to think about engaging differently. We need to think about making change differently. We need to think about learning differently. And that needs to be driven by a different group of people. You know, yeah, I got to say, we knew we needed a different group of people in 1976. We need a different group of people now. And it can't be, the same people can't be trying to change the organization. I love you all, but you can't do it.
I think about, you know, what we all know, which is if I, as Fred Miller, try to stay the same, I'm actually hurting myself and my potential as a human.
Can you say that again, Fred?
If I, as Fred Miller, try to stay the same, I'm actually hurting myself as a person and as a human being. I say that to all our clients now, all my clients, y'all got to get different. I'm going to get badges, buttons like this that say get different. Right. Because our clients have to get different. I say you either change or you die. That's where we are. Now that wasn't as dramatic maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but it's totally 100% true now that you either change, evolve, or you die. And so for me, that stays true for every organization. NTL is an organization. It's like, how do we get different? And how do we be radically different? Radical change. Because the world is radically changing. We might be the frog that's in the hot water that doesn't realize that it's getting hot. But bottom, hello, the water is getting very hot. Change is happening. It's happening very fast. And if we're not changing very fast, then we're falling way behind. And we're not servicing the world that is here and the world that's coming. And so the young people, all of us thinking differently, all of us knowing that if we're doing it the same old way, we're probably putting ourselves at a deficit in the process of change. It's critical. I know many of us are saying that to our clients. We're probably saying that to our relatives and to our children and to our friends and to our neighbors. We all got to get different. And whoever gets different fastest, and whoever gets different aligned with some values and principles that really help human beings be human, I think will be the winners.
Yeah. I would say, the other thing I would say is, I would say, let's focus on the world and not on the membership. And I think we got to focus outside, not inside. And I think for a long time, we focused inside and it's been membership driven as opposed to what does the world really need right now.
I like that. This thing about, I mean, and this is wrapping in so well. I mean, bring young people in, but not just bring them in, give them agency. That's so very important so that they have power to make things change and make real change. Yeah, Freddie, I'm hearing you wanting to say it.
Now, say, where is the greatest need for change? Inside of NTL or in the world outside of NTL? If we're change agents, and trying to have the world be different, where should we be putting our focus? So I appreciate the people in NTL who are constantly trying to grow and develop themselves. And I want to honor that. And at the same time, there is a great need for NTL to be out in the world and influence this world and help this world be a better place.